Hey, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday Talk with Deanna. We are back. I've got my two friends with me, DeeJae and Caroline. I'm so stoked. How are you girls doing today?
I'm going.
We're going.
Yeah.
We're here. Happy Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Oh my gosh. Well, today we're going to be talking about how to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And just so you know what Tuesday Talks are about, if this is the first time that you're tuning in, this is all unscripted. So DeeJae and Caroline have no idea what we're even going to talk about. I don't really even know what we're going to talk about. We just talk about a certain topic, and however and wherever that conversation flows, it flows. And that includes what you guys type in as well. Feel free to message questions in the chat. We will answer them and talk about it. If you've got something you really want to share, we'll bring you on with us. I mean, this is a no rules kind of a live stream. So anyhow, that being said, let's talk about getting uncomfortable. First off, you guys have never been uncomfortable in your business, right?
Oh my goodness. What a question. Loaded. Not at all.
I know.
Yeah.
So I am.
Great question for this morning, by the way.
Yeah.
Good starting question. So, yeah, no.
Yeah.
I feel like I live in uncomfortability. How about that?
Mhm. Yeah,
You know-
I feel like my life is just a constant stream of discomfort all the time.
So let's talk about like the very first, because and you are both in two different phases of your business, which I love, because DeeJae, you're early on as being a full-time entrepreneur, which is really exciting. So in my opinion, it's expected you're going to get uncomfortable in the beginning, right? But Caroline, your business, you've got two businesses. It's growing to new levels that 3 businesses. Okay, because you did just purchase another business. So
Yes,
and you're growing to levels that, I mean, I don't know if you expected to grow so quick. It was like a slow and then a boom, right?
Yeah, the boom has been the hard part, right? That's been the uncomfortable.
So you guys are in two different places. But let's talk about when you first started getting uncomfortable. What was happening when that first feeling of uncomfortableness hit you? Either one of you.
Oh, I thought that was directed at Caroline.
Yeah, no, whichever one. Like,
well, I can answer real quick. Hi,
yeah,
Salty. I just want to say hi, Salty, because I see him pop in. So what's going on, Fran? He's on the other side of the globe, so I don't know what time it is. But for me, golly, like constantly being uncomfortable, live in discomfort, awkwardness. It's new. It's a mindset shift constantly that I'm burning through. Aside from doing like the operational stuff that we do, the mindset is more uncomfortable maybe than the operational stuff. And I struggle with that. So I've had to take all precautions to save my own mental health and my own right in this new phase because it's so uncomfortable.
You know, that's a great point, because it really does weigh on your mental health when you first are getting uncomfortable and you haven't figured out how to get comfortable with it yet. Right? It plays all those head games with you, like that imposter syndrome. What are you even doing? Who told you can actually execute this?
Who put me in charge of this? Like, how did this happen, right? I was trying to think. I think my whole life I've just been uncomfortable, right? So as a swimmer, the whole sport is moving through discomfort all the time, right? I can't do this set. Like, these are not times that I could hold in a practice, yet I did them anyway, right? Like, so I feel like as an entrepreneur, having that swim background and being able to apply it, like, it's still right. Like, I still experienced imposter syndrome as a swimmer, right? I made states my senior year of high school, and I got on this pool deck and there's all these athletes there. Like I'm at the bottom of the barrel of states, right? I'm barely squeaking in. And then the same year, a couple months later, there's 3 or 4 of those athletes were gold medalists at the Olympics, right? So
wow.
pool deck with these people. And the first time you like level up to that level, you're like, how do I belong here? These people are so much better than me. But at the same time, you've earned the right to be at the bottom of that step. But looking back now, that mental piece was always hard in swim, right? Like I'd level up and I'd be at this big meet and I'd be like, I don't deserve to be here. I didn't earn, like these people are like excelling, not realizing that like this is just the steps of passage. So now when I level up, I look back at that time and I think about like how uncomfortable I was on the pool deck and I'm like, no, we're not doing that anymore, right? Like I've earned the right to be here. Like I like imposter syndrome is like the result of leveling up. It's like it's not the price of leveling up, it's the result of leveling up. And you're now entering a new arena where there's more to learn and you can't really compare yourself to the experts in that arena because they started out where you were too, but you can learn from them, right? So it's that mind shift, that gap gain book that we were working on. That whole mind shift from you're not comparing yourself to where they are now, but you're comparing, you have to remember all the work you did to get where you're at. But I've always just been uncomfortable and I'm awkward anyway. So they can just live in like, oh gosh.
I think we all feel really awkward at times. It's so funny because people will say to me, "You're so confident." And I'm like, "What are you looking at?" Like I am so
no
not
idea
confident.
what I'm doing.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I'm not confident at all. Like, what do you see? Because
no, and formidable is another word I've been told. Formidable, like that I'm like intimidating and formidable, and I'm like, I'm not, like I don't know the answers. I just know how to go find the answers, not necessarily that I know all these things. I just know how to go find the answers I need. But that doesn't make me an expert. It just makes me a good Googler, right? Like I'm good at Google. I'm not good at following directions somebody else already figured out. It doesn't mean I did it. It just yeah.
Caroline, I have a question. When you were there swimming and you were competing against who are now, what, 3 you said?
Yeah, there were 3
gold
of them.
medal Olympians. What did you tell yourself at that moment? Like, did you overcome that feeling of being uncomfortable, or were you uncomfortable the whole time and
Oh no,
it
I was
wasn't
just
until it
uncomfortable the whole
ended that you
time. Yeah,
realized
that whole meet, I was uncomfortable. Now, had I been back, like if that had happened my junior year and I had gone back my senior year, I would have had a different mindset. So I remember like going from sectionals to districts. And the first year I did that, I tanked at districts. And then the next year I was confident, and then, the next year after that, I was almost at state. And then the final year I made state. So I almost have to have that like experience that like where I just kind of, well, and the spectrum stuff, right? How do I behave at this level? What are my expectations? It's a whole new world when you level up. Like, what are the expectations? How do I fit in here? I want to make sure that I'm not like a social pariah on day one because I do things differently or I think differently. And so I think for me, a lot of it, even looking back, was a lot of like observation. But I was always in my head, right? Like I remember hearing that all the time. You're just in your head too much. And I'm like, but I am in my head. So
like, how do you get out of your head? Right.
Yeah. And as a coach, I was able to, when I was coaching like competitive swim, I could talk about that experience and be like, look, you've earned the right to be here. Cause I think sometimes I just didn't articulate those like feelings to my coaches. So they couldn't help me with them. But like, I knew that if I had them, other athletes had them. So then I could like use that as I was coaching, but there's nothing, I think for me, it was just experience. And even like going to a conference now, right? The first time I always sit in the back and I'm kind of off to the side. I figure out how I'm supposed to, like, how does this work? And then I can be confident the next round. But I'm usually pretty quiet the first time, more of an observation, input versus output.
I get kind of quiet too when I'm uncomfortable. DeeJae, you just recently spoke at Podfest, which was a huge
and
deal.
Toastmasters.
Yes.
Two big ones for me.
I'm guessing you were pretty uncomfortable prior to that, or
Yes.
Am I right or wrong?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can talk about that. I was writing notes,
Yeah.
Caroline, while you were talking. There's a couple things I wanted to talk about, and I've got 3 to 4 points in my head. One thing, Caroline, I love that you bring up sports, especially as a young person. I've always thought sports was really important in my life growing up because I was also into sports since I was very young, and I played sports in high school. I did track and field, I did soccer. I was an ROTC when we did a lot of marching stuff and um but back to sports, I thought that really helped give me a lot of the skills that I've used throughout my life. So for my daughter, I encouraged her to play sports, and she ended up playing softball for a long time. So, and when I hear about leaders and books, I always feel like there's some sort of underlying quality like that they have, or they were either in sports or they had some sort of military background, even if they served for a shorter amount of time and they didn't really make a career out of it. But I just find it fascinating, all these commonalities, as I'm doing research and reading. um, Going back to your question, Deanna, speaker, yes, absolutely, that was very uncomfortable, but part of that growing and part of this journey for me is doing all this uncomfortable stuff and pushing myself beyond levels. And everywhere I read, that's what they say. You have to be uncomfortable. You have to imagine the impossible. You visualizing yourself making it possible, right? And creating that reality.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna
Yeah.
jump into I'm gonna leave that there and we can chew on that. And then there was one other thing, and then I'm gonna pass it off to the next person, talking about being super uncomfortable, finances and money. That's a tough topic. That's an
Yeah.
uncomfortable topic. And I'm going to bust out the book. I've been reading the book. You Are a Badass at Making Money. And I've got my faces
Yes.
marked. Yes, girl. So I've been inspired by this book. I've been on this because that's part of my mindset, and part of my hang up is that money mindset, that change, and
Mm.
that can really sting, that can really hurt, because society and just everything externally that we're taught put on us about money. And so I've been doing my research and digging, but I'm going to leave that carrot there too as well. Because that's part of being my uncomfortable, and I guess that's where this conversation is going. So yes, pushing myself in all ways, publicly speaking, or even reading books like this behind the scenes and doing the dirty work.
I love that you bring that up, DeeJae, because money really is uncomfortable. Whether you're an entrepreneur or not, as an entrepreneur, it's uncomfortable because you hope to make it. And sometimes, like I had mindset problems when it came to money, where I was afraid to charge what I was worth, or I didn't think of money as a tool to make more money, right? So the way
Yeah,
that I
right.
thought about money, I really thought of it in a lot of ways as in a scarcity mindset instead of an abundance mindset. And it wasn't until, gosh, I attended a training session somewhere and then ended up buying the book, where I recognized we were taught the difference between a scarcity and an abundance mindset. And that was the turning point for me when things started to change at how I looked at money and business. But I'm just going to throw this out there too, even though this live stream is really for business owners, but in your relationships, I mean, people, when you get into a relationship with somebody, you can talk about just about anything, but we freeze up when we start talking about money. We're afraid to have those money conversations. And that's so important. That's so important to understand where you are. And do you think the same way when it comes to money, or are you opposing? And how do you fix that? And Caroline, I see you nodding because you're like, I got a lot to say.
Yeah, well, our first couple years of marriage were, Dawn and I own our business together, and we have vastly different money expectations. And I had gotten through that, like I had spent years in poverty and working through that scarcity mindset to abundance, and understanding I thought I was bad at money, right? Like that when I started YoFresh, I thought I was bad at money. And it was just that nobody had taught me a system that worked for my brain that made sense, right? My dad's method is just don't spend it. Well, when you have ADHD and impulsivity issues, not spending it doesn't matter how bad you don't want to spend it, you go do it anyway. And we still, like, even at, I'm 40 now. So like even at 40, I had a contracting job and we got some money. We went and blew it, some of it, right? Like now, not all of it, but some of it. But it was also nice because we haven't done that in a while. Like we went and bought new stuff for the new house and like we just kind of splurged. However, I'm so mad even now that I did that because I know I could have done better with that money and put it to more use. However, and even now with like the recession and stuff coming potentially, like I'm like, oh, I probably should have spent that. But that's comfort and uncomfortable because I can't change it, right? Like we're spending it, so I can only move forward. But that was really hard in the beginning, was getting like even getting Dawn to understand that that like if you find $100, you can't give 120 away. And even out of the $100 that you find, you're not supposed to, even in an abundance mindset, like in a biblical religious set, doesn't mean give all 100 away. You're only supposed to, what is it, 10%?
$10, yeah.
Yeah, like so 10 of it you give away and 90 you put back into to do something else, right? Because that $90 could be earning interest, right? You could put that whole $100 into it, even if it only earned 1%, like at the end of the year, then you could give away $10 and you still have more than 90 left over, and it's going to continue to earn interest. And so getting even at a 1% interest, right? So like shifting that mindset and understanding, even like I have to treat my personal finances like they're a business. That's the only way it works for me.
I do that too.
Right? But like it's the only way it works for me. It's this money comes in and where am I going to allocate it to spend? Because the money, like the way you stay out of debt is by not spending money you don't have. Now in business, apparently there's better debt because business capital, right? So that's a whole other world that I'm so uncomfortable in because I don't like that period.
Yes, I'm uncomfortable with that too, but
yeah, but at the same time, you need working capital, and that's business. You're using somebody else's money.
You work towards that, right? That's leveling up. You work
be able to have the credit to get that, and stuff. But even Dawn seeing now that having good credit at home affects how we're able to manipulate our business. And so, and Dawn came from no credit history. I came from crap credit history, right? Undiagnosed ADHD, didn't understand how I was using my money. And so putting those two together, it was rough in the beginning. And then now we're in a much better place to where Dawn's actually asking, like, what's our budget look like? Like, versus where before he just didn't care. And now he's like, well, this doesn't seem fair. And I think I want to say, and I'm like, well, that's great, but we're going to do it together then. Like, cause right. Like that's how it needs to be, because I can't do all the work and maintain it and have you be on the same page. We have to do the work together. So kind of where
I feel everything you just said there.
We're a lot better than where we started. We're definitely a lot better.
Good.
Still some work to do, but the fact that he's even asking questions, right? Like, well, I see all this come into the house. And I'm like, yes, but those are business expenses and I budget for that and I allocate for that, versus I just didn't blow $300 on Amazon for fun. Like I put that stuff in my cart for weeks and I've put things away and I put things back. And then I finally made these purchases. Like I don't just order whatever I want all the time. Yeah. So it's hard to, I think what's hard is people don't see when, DeeJae, you're talking about like the dirty work. It's like, they don't see the work behind the scenes ever. Like even as an athlete, right? Like, or in the military, you don't see all that work behind the scenes they see the performance, not the work.
Yeah. And we're taught to post that. We're taught to share all those good things. Right. And I know there's been other conversations where, it's hard to post when you're going through something hard. It's hard to post when you're on your low and share those harder times and those uncomfortable times and those awkward times and those embarrassing times, right? As we're feeling this shame, like, oh, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know, but I need to learn this. It's part of my business growth. It's part of my growth. And so how do we, show that, I hate to say the word vulnerability, but how do we share that, right? How do we let that out and say, hey, this is what I'm going through, but I can't be the only one, right? And I think that goes back to my show personally, when I talk about those mental health, disability, and trauma issues. But, it can be anything related to as our finances and our money and how our business is going, and taboo, right? Those taboo things that we're not supposed to talk about when we're raised. Oh, we don't talk about money, or, people with money, right, are this or that, and all those things that we're taught. And it makes us uncomfortable now that we're entrepreneurs, now that we have to handle and have these conversations. and you see people that are ready to have these conversations, and you're sitting there and you're just like, I'm not ready for this conversation. I need to get ready for this conversation. So I've had those moments.
Right? Yeah, good girls don't talk about money, right? Like that's the message we're taught, and that's not going to help any of us fiscally be better.
Yeah, no, I agree. So either one of you can answer this question, or both of you can answer this question, but I'm curious, well, it doesn't have to be in your business, but when were you the most uncomfortable that you can remember? Did you ever I'll share mine first while you guys think about it, right? So so I would say for me, because I was like, when was I the very most uncomfortable? And it was really before I had carbon silk. When I was first baking, you guys both know this, but some people listening may not, but I left my job and decided to start an at-home business as a single mom, probably 15, 13, I don't even know how many years ago now. I just lost count. I had no idea what I was doing. But you know what's funny is I was not uncomfortable at that moment. I didn't have a game plan, didn't have a safety net, but I wasn't uncomfortable. I was at complete peace. But it was when I realized, and I started baking, and I grew that business and promoted it on social media, and it did really, really well. But when I realized that it really wasn't what I wanted, and I had to shift to something else and eventually shift to marketing for other people because of everything that I did with my at-home business, because I got a lot of local publicity for that. So I started helping other businesses do it. That was really uncomfortable for me. And the biggest reason that it was so uncomfortable was because during that time, I had been in survival mode. And people would always say to me, "So what are you doing now? So what are you doing now?" And I hated that statement because I looked flighty. And they were right. I looked flighty. I felt flighty. I felt like I don't even know what I'm doing at this point. And all that imposter syndrome kind of kicked in. And you put it on the face, you fake it, right? You're like, "Nope, I could do this. I know what I'm doing." But inside, you're like, "I don't have a clue to what I'm doing. And I don't even know if this is going to work. But if it doesn't, I'm going to lose everything because I don't want to get a job. I want to figure it out." But I got really, really uncomfortable because, like DeeJae, what you just said, there was nobody to really talk to about that, because my fear was when you start talking about those vulnerabilities, then those vulnerabilities become reality. And I didn't want to sit in my own crap or play the victim. Right. And that was my fear about talking about how I was feeling vulnerable and lost and confused. And I was trying to figure it out on my own. And it was super uncomfortable. And it was, you had to really get into your own head and shift that mindset. But that was really hard to do. Did you guys do that at all? Like, where you were afraid to talk about I wasn't comfortable talking about my vulnerabilities until I had figured out and went beyond those vulnerabilities and went to the next stage. Then I could talk about what happened in the stage before. But when I was in it, I was afraid to talk about it because it felt that I was giving it more power than what it needed to be.
Right. Where it's actually the opposite, right? Naming it takes away its power, right?
Yeah.
Like when you name it, it takes away its power. And like we're taught like whatever you speak into the world is what comes true, right? So if we speak this vulnerability, it's going to come true. But really it's the opposite, because speaking your truth and speaking your fears are not the same, right? Like,
oh, that's good. Wait, I gotta like splice this and quote that, Caroline.
I don't know where that came from. I'm glad this is being recorded because I could never remember that I said that again. But like,
you have to watch it again.
Speaking your truth, which is like how you're feeling, right, is your truth, is not the same as speaking like. Wait, I lost it.
Speaking your truth.
Okay. So like, yes, but like learning to ask for help was the first thing I wrote down that made me the most uncomfortable. Like learning how to actual human, right? Like I faked it till I maked it, and I didn't understand. Like people would see me struggling, but nobody was like, "Hey, I see you struggling. Can I help you?" Right? Like
Yeah.
they're like, "Why didn't you just ask for help?" And I was like, "I didn't know I could," because I've always figured things out on my own, right? Like,
Yes.
so like that's been. But when it came to like learning vulnerability, I didn't really have much of a choice because when I made my adoption plan, right? Like
Oh,
that was that was the second thing I wrote down was my adoption plan. Like, so I've had to trust Brooke and Todd my whole life that they are going to do good by Abby and do the best they can to raise her. So like I didn't have a choice. Like I just had to be vulnerable, and that taught me a lot about putting those like feelings out in the open and being vulnerable and being asking for help, because that's probably like as a woman, right? Being like, I don't want to be a parent and I'm pregnant and like I have to solve
yeah.
this problem, and I don't want to have an abortion. So like I don't have a choice. I have to ask for help. And
Wow.
that was the big shift. That was at 29. And so like I think everything from being pregnant on has like shifted some of that mindset in general,
Wow.
because I can work it back to that.
Yeah, I
Yeah, we
can't.
never even talked about my adoption plan on the last
No,
podcast either.
we didn't. And you're talking, and there's so many times that our personal life does impact how we react in our professional life. And I can't even imagine the amount of selflessness that it took to go through your pregnancy, to carry your daughter,
Yeah.
to birth, and then to trust to other people to raise her. And you guys have like this open relationship,
Yeah, it's been good. I
and
was just there.
it has to be super cool, but also kind of painful. And I don't want you to, right? Like I don't
It
want to
is.
put you on the spot with
No,
any
it's okay. And
emotions or anything
this
like
is my
that, but
norm. It's my normal. So
it's
when I first had her, being a birth mother was like all of me, right? And then eventually now it's just a piece of me. It's always going to be part of me, but it's no longer like the big piece. And so
yeah.
it is. There is a lot of grief, but there's also a lot of love, and there's only that much grief because there's so much love, right? So when her and I are talking now, for years, and I'd leave after a visit and she'd say like, "Don't cry, you can't cry," and I'm like, "It doesn't matter, I can't help it." Like this is like, it doesn't matter, I can't. I can trust me, I don't want to be crying in front of you, but I don't have a choice. And because like my brain and body won't let me. And then now she's crying when I leave too, and so we were just talking about it the last time. I was like, that's the big love. Like big love is the only way, like, because you can't have the good without the bad. So it would not feel this painful if it wasn't this great and
Yeah.
amazing and strong.
Yes.
So it's
Well,
big
that's good
love
too.
is big grief. And it's the easy 10-year-old way to explain it. But I think
Yeah.
it really just makes it, it's all you have to say. It's big love, honey. That's why there's such big tears, because we love
Aw,
so much.
I love that.
And
Wow.
I
I
do.
know.
I love that. I felt that.
Yeah. And it's
Thank
just the
you for
best way. And I think
sharing,
anybody that parents
Caroline.
feel the same way, right? Like when your kids leave the nest, like you have
Yeah.
grief because you loved so much. It's not because, like it's just
Yeah.
part of it. It's knowing that emotions just are versus good or bad, right? Like
Yeah.
that shift, they just happen, and you have to have the balance, or they don't feel this big love if you don't have this either, right? Because if
Yeah.
you're always here, then this is here. So if you're always, this is here, this has to be here.
So do you incorporate, because I love everything you shared, and thank you for being so vulnerable with not just us but anybody who's listening or watching this on the replay, because that's big vulnerability to be able to share that. And I, I appreciate you doing that, because that's just big. With the big love brings big tears, which is so
Beautiful.
sweet. Yeah, it is. It's so beautiful.
That's your book.
Oh, yes, that is a great title for a book. Write that down. You're writing that
That's
down.
right, big love.
Big love, big tears.
Do you find ways to incorporate that mindset into your business at all, or does that stay there? Like, Does that cross over, or?
I
I love that big brings.
think, I mean, it has to, because like it's just who I am.
Yeah.
I think it's made me lead differently now that I've been able to understand it, right? So I stopped coaching. Like, I was pregnant while I was coaching, right? Like, on a pool deck, there's baby. Like, lifeguards were terrified I was going to have this baby on the pool deck. 16-year-old lifeguards, poor guys. And then so like and then I stopped coaching around 36. So that shifted, right, from like 29 to 36, and like how I thought about things and vulnerability and feelings and emotions. And then now that I'm out of that world and into like this, I'm leading people, and I mean, I do it for the neurodiverse like umbrella, but it's still like that people first and like feelings first. And I like, I wish I could just not have them in business, right? Like they don't belong, but people are human. And so like when we start out our we do 2 like big team meetings a month, and when we start them out, I stole this from Brene Brown, but like she does 2 feeling words. And so that's how we start out our meetings too. So you just tell me 2 feeling words. You don't have to explain them, but like so and it's funny with all neurodiverse people, we always give like, so they'll be like, I'm feeling a little fuzzy-ish. And I'm like,
I get that.
Yeah, like I'm understanding fuzzy-ish. And like a lot of times they're like paradoxical, like I'm really excited, but I'm really terrified, right? Like, and you know, and they don't think things like that. Or but I feel like that's probably how we start to incorporate it. And so I'm trying to lead that way. I don't know if I'm doing a good job at it, but I'm trying. And having like that judgment-free zone where we talk about that's like one of our like first or second agenda items. It's the like, what was good, what was bad, how do we solve the problems, not this bad thing happened accusing. It's, this was a problem, this is how we solved it, or we still need to work on a solution. And doing it in a non-judgmental way, hopefully. That's what we're trying to do. I guess that's the best way I can.
I love it though. No, I get that. I get that. And if anybody is commenting on here, it logged me out of the chat, and I'm afraid to log in, thinking that I might end up ending this. So if you have commented,
you can jump in. It's not going to stop the stream because
it
we're
won't,
here and we're live. Yeah, but you're going to miss the chat. Is going to be gone when you come back. That it will be gone. So, but if it's locked up, you can jump out and come back. And we'll be here.
Well, it logged me out of the chat.
That's so weird.
It is so weird. Yeah, it never happened before. So I can't see anything.
Is it frozen?
No, it just says log in.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to try to hit log in, and hopefully I don't lose you guys. So
all right, we'll be here.
If not, I'll hop back in.
Yeah, that's fine.
You. But yeah, so let's talk about, though, before I hit this log in, I'll get the conversation going. Overcoming that feeling of being uncomfortable. So we're now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm cool with being uncomfortable, because then I know I'm hitting a new level, right? Like, but how do you get to that point to be cool with being uncomfortable?
Oof, that's a good one. That's a good one. How do you get cool with being uncomfortable? I think for me, I gotta prepare. I like preparation. I like to know what is to be expected. I like to get my resources together, my information together, feel as prepared as I can for what's ahead that I'm going to conquer and that I'm going to overcome. I'm going to, what is it? Challenge? Wait, what was that conversation we had about? It's not a challenge, Caroline or Deanna. It's a whatever. So
yes, instead of using that, it's an opportunity. No,
opportunity. Yeah, like just keep moving forward and just not. And I know in these books I've been reading, either this one and the Brene Brown, it's or I should say the Mel Robbins one, where it's that fear needs to be excitement, right? Knowing that you're going to change that fear into excitement. That I've used that trick for a long time with my anxiety. Whether it was that first stream, that was so uncomfortable. Those streams, my stomach still turns if I have like a guest that is, I feel intimidated by, and they're very accomplished, and I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want to butcher this stream. I don't want something to go wrong. I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to say something where I sound whatever, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
So that for me, there's a lot of uncomfort constantly, but I'm okay with that because I know that it's part of that growth. It's part of that development. And I'm okay with that because something's going to come out of that. And then knowing that whatever happens, I'm going to reflect on it and I know I'm going to grow from it. So that's
Yeah.
part of that is just knowing that no matter what happens, if it totally goes great or if it totally bombs, there's going to be something to be learned from it and I'm going to be okay and we're going to move forward. And I have a large support team, right? Like knowing your support, counting on your support that you've established, that you really have built that network with. Intimate, right? It doesn't have to be tons of people, but just whoever you consider your support and just having kind of that ready. So that's how I approach things.
Yeah, I like that. Go ahead, Caroline.
No, I think it's that growth. It's living in growth mindset, right? Like I was already in that world before I realized that was what that was called.
Yeah.
It's the failing forward, or right. You can't really fail. You have to grow, right? You learn or you succeed. Like there's no fail. And in swimming, I think for me, if I bring it back, like I can remember trying to break a minute in the 100 free. I must have swam that thing like 100 times. And before I finally broke my minute, right? Like my one friend went 10000 like 4 times before she broke a minute. It's one of those things. It's like a little mind trick that like a lot of people have a hard time breaking that barrier. And then once you do, all of a sudden you're like, boom, and you're like, but you have to really like stick with it. And it's like trusting the work behind the scenes will get you there eventually. And like understanding. So like, you're just sitting there, like you could spend a whole season racing this race and never achieve it. But that doesn't mean the work wasn't worth it. Right. Because the achievement, it's like, so I think for me, a lot of it, it's like being uncomfortable is where the work is. And that's what I enjoy. And that's where the growth happens. It's not the result, like what you show on social media is the end result of the work. But I've always liked the work and like that heavy work and the hard work. So like now as an entrepreneur, it's brain work, not so much body work. But it translates. And then I'm going to share my screen real quick because I have a maybe I'm going to try this. I was introduced to this. This is a visual. Can you guys see this?
No, but
Not
hang
yet.
on.
There
we go.
There it goes. Okay. So this sigmoid curve, what I love about this is kind of like when you look at like the growth mindset, this is basically what it is. So like you're working on blue, right? And then all of a sudden, like at some point you're going to peak off and kind of come down. So if you don't make a change and grow, you're going to drop down, right? So like, I don't like that downward slope, that blue down. So I don't want that. So it's the trick is figuring out where A is, but then you have to understand it's going to get harder before it gets better. And then because that transition, right? So when people talk about the messy middle, that's what I imagine that transition.
I love this.
Yeah.
Leave it up for a second. Wow.
Yeah. And I've even used this with some of my swimmers that I work with now with my special needs so that they can visualize like we're learning a new skill. Just because you have all 3 little pieces doesn't mean putting it together is going to be easy, right? Like you can do a flip, you can push off the wall on your back, but you have to learn how to swim into the wall, flip, land your feet, and push off. That's way harder than all 3 of those things by themselves. And that's this messy middle. And it's going to be hard for a while. And then it's going to get easier all of a sudden. And so I like this one a lot.
I like that too. Do you guys start to freak out when you're not uncomfortable too long?
No, bring it back.
Oh, you bring it back?
Yeah, bring it back because I want to point to it. This is a great, I think, visual to talk on as we're going through this, and I don't want to lose the visual because I love visuals.
No, you're good. It's coming.
But I didn't realize that there were like 2 curves. So I didn't realize like you're changing, right? Those intersections, you're gonna get off and you're gonna jump on the next track and you're gonna go through that next growth curve. And they never looked at it that way. So I feel like I'm at the peak, right? So remember when I went back to this operational stuff, it's like you're doing all the operational work and yeah, that's great. but you're doing also this emotional, psychological mindset work at the same time. Okay, so you're running right now, for me, two growth tracks. Um, my operational track feels like I'm starting to smooth it out. I'm getting the hang of it. I'm getting the emails. I've got my website. Like things are starting to calm down, right? And now I feel like I'm starting. So maybe it's more of this another track I'm going to jump onto because something else is going to come. And I think that goes back to saying maybe not right now, but that's something else to learn about later on, right? Like that's
Right.
the
Like
next step
maybe
of
you're
growth.
not at point A yet. You're down here more like where curve 1 is sitting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like you're trying to get to point A, but you can't do that till you get to point
Or
A.
curve two, right? Curve
Right.
one and curve
Or
two.
curve 2, right? Yeah, like
Yeah,
wherever you're at. It's like getting to that next point. So that's like the not yet, right? It's
and not
not
yet.
not a no, it's just a not yet. Because you're not at that transition point yet.
I love this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like
Makes everything make sense and why getting uncomfortable is so important. I mean, this is why if you are in business or anybody, this could be personal too, right? Because we're all learning and growing and trying to improve ourselves in different areas of our lives.
And multiple of these, multiple curves are going
Absolutely
on.
multiple.
right. Yeah. Even
Yeah,
like
so you
talking
have
about
to
your
get
trauma,
uncomfortable. You've got to
right?
get to the messy middle if you
Mhm.
want to get to that next level.
Hashtag that. I love that. Messy middle.
Yeah, this is a great visual. I agree with DeeJae. Thank you for sharing this, Caroline. This
I don't
is
even know how I found it. I was at a talk for something and somebody mentioned it, and then ever since then it's just stuck because it's just such a great visual.
Powerful.
it really is. And yeah, I appreciate this. It does make it more makes more sense because here's the thing, when you are starting to get uncomfortable, now you can visualize this and say, "Oh, I'm going to keep getting uncomfortable until I hit point A." And then I know it's going to get a little bit messy, a little bit more uncomfortable, right? But I'm expecting that. But now I'm going to go to another level. And it's going to be clear riding for a little bit, but then I'm going to hit another point A.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go to the next level, right? So when you
Right.
get this, it's
It,
like you kind of get into that rhythm, that flow.
right. And DeeJae even mentioned it, like it's that expectation, that plan, right? So you can
Yeah.
plan for this to happen, and be strategic kind of when it happens. And sometimes life throws it at us and we have to do it, right? We don't have a choice. We have to make that transition. But it's it's just part of it. And it's that plan and understanding like you can still be growing and having a hard time, right? Like those powerful words of like and yet, right? Those are really powerful words versus like but, right? But because the but is a negative, but and right, I can be working on my operations and struggling on
Yes,
this
and
curve. Yeah, yep, yeah, and
Yeah. I'm
those
going
are my two favorite words.
So what's funny is that I in a way I've been feeling that without realizing I was feeling that or that was what was happening because just prior to I don't know, just a couple minutes ago, I said, when things get too comfortable for too long, that's when I worry because then I'm like, something's not happening. Yeah, like money might be coming in, the business might be doing well, but if I'm comfortable too long, then I'm like, I'm not really pushing myself. I'm not doing something I need to be doing because I need to get to that uncomfortable level. But I must have ridden that wave, those curves so many times, but I didn't, to see it makes it a reality where now it makes sense in my brain what was really happening and maybe why I feel like that.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
That was really, really
That's,
cool.
Yeah,
yeah, that was.
I think too, like thinking about that graph, it's also important to remember a plateau. Like there's time is going across the bottom, right? Which axis is that? Uh
Y
X,
and X,
Y.
X and Y.
Yeah,
Y
yeah.
is
Bottom.
vertical.
Y, X.
I,
Axis
But
is
across the bottom is
horizontal.
time. So even if you're not quite growing yet, you're still moving forward. And so it's also important to remember, even though we're looking at a two-dimensional diagram, we're not just looking at up, right? Like we're also looking at forward, and that time now granted, time costs money in a business, but sometimes holding still for a little bit in one growth curve isn't bad, because like we talked about, that was a very simplified version of one growth curve. You
Right.
need to be holding steady. So like at YoFresh, Dawn was on this little kick for a while about like, we need to work on these routes, like the other staff's not as effective. And I was like, dude, we're good. They're working just fine. We're gonna let that ride at a plateau, because we need to work on like our SOPs for cleaning and get the staff to do that now. We don't need to approve this yet. Like, that needs to stay there. It's okay that you see holes. Let's write them down, but we're not doing this growth curve yet.
Right.
We're going to work on growing the SOPs so
Yes.
that the staff is cleaning, and we're adding, now that they've got a good plateau here, right? We're plateaued. So now it's time to add a new step, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in that same blue curve. It might be a green curve that we're going to add. It's not even there yet, right? Like,
I think that's being strategically smart, because if you try to manage all the curves at one time, your head might explode.
It's like doing all the things, right? It's like trying to do all the things.
Right. So I think that's smart, because I mean, we are juggling a lot of different curves at one time in our lives in general. So holding some still while you focus on the weakest curve that needs the most attention is smart. So I
Before stuff starts
appreciate.
sliding back.
I know, right? Like, it's just like all the Italians coming out of me with like all my hand.
Yeah,
I love it.
My visual in my head is like complex web of curves and strings.
Oh yeah. And I know that a lot of people reference that learning curve. We have this learning curve that we're on, right? We're learning this. But yeah, being strategic about it too. And it's, sometimes we do slide back, right? Sometimes it's going to happen. We're like, oh, that was a lot harder, and it's not as easy, or it's too much. It's more time consuming than I thought. I love that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all part of it. It's all part of it.
It definitely, it is. And I think just understanding that is so important. And it's almost like that graph or that chart that you just shared with us gives you permission and grace to be uncomfortable, because it shows how it's so necessary. Yeah.
And normal.
So it is. It's needed. So just embrace it instead of trying to fight it. And, I think you said it earlier, right? Fear, being uncomfortable and fear are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
We feel fear when we're uncomfortable sometimes, right? Do we feel it all the time?
I feel fear. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think people feel different things when they're uncomfortable. Some people would feel maybe frustrated or aggravated. I don't tend to feel those feelings necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what I would call my baseline. I generally feel more anxiety or nervousness or insecurity when I feel fear.
Yeah.
So it just depends on maybe someone's experiences and how they're approaching or where they're at in their journey and what they've experienced before. Because some of those feelings, I can handle my insecurity because I've got techniques to overcome them. But if someone doesn't have a way, maybe perhaps to tackle those overwhelming feelings that surface, it might be a lot harder for them to continue.
You know what? I agree with you, DeeJae. And I think it's so important to do things that make you uncomfortable. So I'll give an example, right? And I hope nobody hears. Are you guys afraid to fly? Okay, I'm not either. But I was on a flight from LA to Pittsburgh, and I don't know, years ago. And we hit some turbulence, right? We're going through a storm. And next thing I know, and I love the window seat, but I happen to be in the middle of the seat on this particular flight. But I always sit by the wing for whatever reason. I guess the wing's pretty big, so your chances are probably higher of sitting by the wing. But I was sitting right up on like where you can see the wing perfectly. We're hitting some turbulence. I'm like, not a big deal. I'm just gonna, whatever. I just want to get home. And all of a sudden, the plane dropped. Like you felt like it goes straight down, and out the window was this huge burst of orange. And I about jumped in the guy's lap next to me and held on for dear life. Didn't know who he was, didn't matter
Oh
who he
my
was,
goodness.
right? I'm like, just, you are the person to save me right now. Like, whatever's happening. Well, we landed in Phoenix. They did an emergency landing and told us that the plane was struck by lightning, but that the flight was canceled. Like the damage was too bad that we couldn't take off again. They had to figure it out. I wanted to get back home. My boys were little at the time. And I'm like, no. And part of me was like, I'm just going to rent a car and drive home from Phoenix. Right. So that's what I'm going to do. And this was obviously before renting cars were like $50,000. It was like, you can rent a car fairly inexpensive. But I forced myself to get back on the plane. They did find another flight for me. I took the red eye. I got on the plane. I was so scared because that just happened. And that storm, maybe it wasn't as bad, but it was still really real in my mind that it can happen again. Or maybe we're going to fly back into that same storm if it's shifting. But I faced that, and I'm so grateful that I did right at that moment, because I could have created a fear in me that was still present today. But that being said, I think it's so important to do things that scare you in life, right? Like to make a list of maybe 5 things or 4 things or 3 things or 1 thing a year that makes you really uncomfortable, and do it. Toastmasters. DeeJae and I are both in Toastmasters. I had been invited to join Toastmasters in Ohio a million different times. I wouldn't do it. I was terrified. Even though I would speak in public, the thought of standing in front of my peers who knew me and would critique me scared the heck out of me. And I wouldn't do it, right? So that was one thing. But have you guys done something where you're like, I'm going to do this, whatever it was, right? I'm going to do this and face this one fear, like jumping out of a plane, or I'm going to get uncomfortable doing something that I've never done before. You had to have.
I've done that. Yeah, all of it. Well,
All the
yeah.
time.
This is it.
Another book.
What?
It's like a
I
whole
live
other
in
book.
fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. One thing. Think of
fear.
one thing. Do you think it made a difference then, since you guys have a ton of things you did?
Absolutely.
Do you think
Well,
it's
for me,
important to
yeah.
challenge
For me,
yourself to do that?
Yeah, I think it's important even to try it once, because that you like, you don't know if that thing is like a genuine like personality fear, or like a like a fear of doing something and it's not as bad as we thought and we worked it up in our head, or if it genuinely is something that is just you're not your strength and you're not good at, right? Like
Yeah.
so like ballet comes to mind. So I've always loved ballet. I took ballet in college, and I was like talking about taking ballet too, and my instructor's like, honey, I've seen you swim and I've seen you dance. If you don't love this, I would just stick with swimming. And I was like, I'm like a robot. I'm like I think I'm like a graceful ballerina, and I'm like this robot. It's not good. It's not. I don't have a land coordination. It's awful. But like I still did it anyway, you know. And like I've seen
love
videos
that.
of me like doing ballet. I was like, oh, right. But like I still enjoyed the semester of like learning something new, but then learning this isn't really for me, right? Like she's like, don't feel obligated to take ballet too, to like prove yourself. Like if you don't love this, don't do it. Like, you know, you're not great at it. It's okay to say no. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. So
I you know what? I love everything. I love that you challenged yourself, and I love that your
And it's okay to say
ballet
it's not for me.
instructor was like, listen, here's your strength. Go with it.
and you're beautiful. I mean, you're not so beautiful on land.
You're not so graceful, Caroline.
It's already known, but
you're
like,
a killer swimmer.
But
You're
I think that's amazing. I think that's definitely part of this whole uncomfortable, and taking that and saying, okay, well, maybe that wasn't for me. And that's okay. And moving on to the next
right.
thing.
And
Not
still
taking
like
it personally, not letting it like internalizing it and taking it into this very, dark place. Like there's no need for that. It's like, okay, well, at least I tried it, and that's okay. And for me as a new entrepreneur, going back as we wrap it up, it's the same thing. It's like, what I'm going to try next. Is it going to work? It may not, but that's okay. I got to give it a shot. As I make decisions for the business, Caroline, as you continue to make those decisions, executive decisions in your business, right? We have to keep getting through that uncomfortable decision making, and those like research I like to go to, right? Like figuring it out. Like, okay, I don't know a lot about this, but I need to figure it out. And eventually you have to be confident in that decision that you make and following through with it, at least to know if it was for you or not for you, right? But you want to give it your all. You want to make sure that you are really committed to it and don't do things half-assed because that's not ever going to work.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I was just thinking earlier, and I wrote it down real quick. So as we wrap up, I think that whole fear is almost like a faux feeling, because there's more, it's false. There's more beneath the surface of fear. Like fear is the like emotion that presents itself, but what's under that shell, or like Dawn and I talk about onion layers all the time. So if it's like the onion skin is fear, right? Like we know if we're uncomfortable, we have this layer of fear, but like what is the underlying emotions for that individual when they feel fear, right? And being afraid for my like safety at home, like in a relationship, feels very different than feeling unsafe in work because something's new and I'm uncomfortable, right?
Yes.
They're both fear, but they're not. They
Very
don't have
different.
this response
And
in
that
my
goes
body,
back to
right?
what I was
Like
saying. Yeah, right.
fawn, like one causes like fight, flight, fawn, and the others like
Trigger something else.
is an action, I guess. Like
Yeah.
it's right. Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it triggers something else, a different set of emotions, a different experiences that are triggered in our mind, or those feelings that we felt perhaps when, right? I mean, I get that. I get that.
Yeah, I
Yeah, it takes
totally
a
get
lot of
that.
work.
I love this conversation. I love where it went. I love that we talked about money. Caroline, that you brought up that chart. That was an aha moment to visually see how we need to get uncomfortable. We need to be comfortable getting uncomfortable, and just you guys both sharing your stories. So this was really, really good. Lots of good stuff in today's conversation. Thank you both for joining me. I just appreciate you so much.
Thank
And
you.
everybody, thank you for watching. If
Thank
you're
you.
watching it on the replay, let me know you're watching it on the replay. Let me know your favorite takeaway. Would love to hear that. Just comment on the video. And I guess I'll see everybody next Tuesday, 9 o'clock. We'll see ya.